Okay, well, hello everybody. I'm Jonathan Crouch, and I'm going to be talking about mapping African soils at high resolution. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm leading the ISDA team, but most of the heavy lifting was done by the people listed on this slide, particularly Matt Miller, our lead data scientist, together with Tom Hengel and his group at Envirometrics. So the original idea for this resource is more than a decade ago and can be traced back to Pedro Sanchez in his paper in Science, where this idea was originally floated, and that group then subsequently went away and raised the finance for that. And then almost 10 years later, the publication came, and the groundbreaking soil nutrient maps at 250-meter resolution were released and are available through the ISRIC website under the Soil Grids portal. So none of this would have been possible without investment throughout that decade from the Gates Foundation through what was called AFSIS, the African Soil Information Service. And equally, none of this would have been possible without the tremendous effort of the national program scientists in all of these countries. Several of them took those resources on to build systems on the national level. And then, of course, there were a whole group of R&D groups and programmers working in the background. And then finally, the machines, which enabled us to work at the level of a whole continent, both in terms of scale and speed of processing, but also of affordability. So the mid-infrared spectroscopy machines shown here are the ones that were the core workhorse of AFSIS. And of course, that was cross-referenced through gold standard analysis using wet chemistry. But that allowed a magnitude step up in the level of analysis that was possible. More recently, XRF has become an important addition to the lab equipment as well. But the thing that's been particularly important for us trying to work for smallholders is the commercialization of near-infrared spectroscopy machines, as shown here, which has allowed us to take this analysis down to the last mile and in many cases into the field. So that's the history. What I like to do now is to focus on what ISDA's doing to build resources on top of the foundation outputs that have come from AFSIS. Just a quick word about us. We're essentially working around a science and innovation base in order to provide low-cost, affordable solutions for smallholders, particularly in Africa. And coupling with that, trying to build relationships with commercial enterprises in smallholder value chains, harness those market forces to enable us to deliver our interventions at high scale, ultimately to millions of smallholders. So we're a social enterprise that's been spun out of AFSIS. Our core business obviously is around data analytics and decision support tools. But we're very much trying to build those and apply those within a holistic context, both within the biological context, but also increasingly important around the economic context as well. And to align us with that, our primary KPI is around smallholder profitability, so that we're going beyond productivity and showing deep impact, sustainable impact on smallholder incomes. So back to the core topic of the presentation, and that's ISDAsoil. We've just a few weeks ago released our first open product, and that is a series of interactive digital maps on our website. Here's a selection of them, from carbon through sand and texture, and there's a whole series of those that we'll talk about in more detail in a little while. But first of all, just a little bit of a background. So here's a map of the training points for that resource. A big proportion of that is the AfCPA sampling, but we've also pulled together a whole series of other projects that either weren't finished or weren't available at the time of the Soil Grids initiative. Since all of this is project-based, inevitably this has resulted in greater density of training points in some countries than other countries. One of the things that we're really putting a call out for is people who have similar data in countries where the density is lower. Please reach out to us so that we can incorporate this into the resource and generate an update. So I'm not going to go into the specific technical details of the mapping process. We've got a couple of workshops later in the conference where we'll get into that in great detail. But just to remind you, it's based on ground truth data of over 100,000 points combined with satellite data at very different layers, and that put into a whole series of modeling algorithms and combined through an ensemble process to give maps across 22 different soil properties at 2 different depths and at 30-meter resolution. So billions of data points that have been projected through this process. And as expected, we have plenty of maths to support this, but it's easier to visualize it. Here's the Soil Grids 250-meter resolution on the left. On the right, here's the resolution of ISDAsoil at 30-meter resolution. So that's very important for us, getting down to something which is more or less at the scale of a farm, or perhaps sometimes even a field. But we are still very much aware that there are many steps between having these predicted point data and being able to provide a really robust and reliable agronomic advisory at the farm level for smallholders. So we'll come back to that more later on. I wanted to highlight some of the functionality that's been added to the 30-meter release. So beyond just resolution, we've now offered the functionality so that you can click on absolutely any point in the map and you can see what's the level of confidence or uncertainty associated with that. There's a whole lot of factors that are driving that, but one of them obviously is the level of training points within that particular locality. So this is something during the AfCPA period that many people were asking for. So we've provided that throughout all of the maps of ISDAsoil. Another thing is the first level of interpretation of the data of the maps, and we're reflecting on the capability of the soil fertility. So you can click on any point on any of the maps and it will give you what are the major constraints in that particular location. So we hope that's a first step in taking this to application. So as I say, we have made this completely open access under open data license on our website. You can get an API key and query it and download specific layers. You can download the whole data set via Zenodo, and soon we'll hope to have a resource through the Google Earth Engine to also give a different level of access to this. So I'd like to concentrate the rest of the presentation on the applications that we're involved in, and also the considerations and constraints that we might wish to bear in mind when we're trying to apply the information from these maps. So I'd just like to start with this framework that I saw recently from a local seed company, which we feel is a microcosm of the whole story of agronomic advisory. So clearly the maps are helping with the soil chemistry and to some degree the physics, but there's still a whole lot of biology to manage as well. So what we've been doing this year has been running nutrient emission trial series in northern Ghana and using that to validate our fertilizer recommendation tools that we've been building off the back of ISDAsoil. And we've been collaborating with scientists in the CGIAR who have done similar things in Nigeria, and trying to get a similar level of validation for that country. And again, the shout out to anybody who has similar data across, this is focused on maize for the moment, any crops where we can try to do something similar within the, across the region. So as I was saying, that we've started using these handheld devices to go into the field and working with commercial aggregators, this one in Kenya, on coffee. And we're working with around 10,000 farmers at the moment, building on the systems that the aggregators already have in place for information exchange and for support systems for their farmers to provide now a level of soil testing to drive their fertilizer recommendations. We're also building an army of what we're calling village enterprise advisors to be the interface between any sort of technology and the farmers. And ultimately, as new technologies come in, we will switch them in, and anything that's built out of iSDAsoil, we will try to integrate into this type of approach as well. We're also working in Rwanda, and here we have a different set of challenges. We've got the technical challenge of trying to develop fertilizer recommendations from analysis of flooded soils is very difficult. So we're trying to overcome that in a different way. In Rwanda, plot size, farm size is very small, and so here we've got the challenge of trying to find a price point that is affordable for those farmers. And so we're using iSDAsoil to stratify these continuous production systems. Often that's 20 or 50, sometimes even more hectares of continuous rice production. We can use the map to optimize the number and location of emission trials and bring down the price point of a recommendation across that community for those individual farmers. So we're doing that together with 3 of the biggest commercial rice aggregators in the country and the government and their fertilizer subsidy scheme in order to create a fully integrated solution, which we hope will have a substantial impact on yields of rice across the country. So there's just a few examples of the things that we're doing. We're always trying to combine the digital solution with ground data and find the balance between cost and accuracy. As mentioned, we're also putting a lot of effort into the economic side of the story. And here we've got a graph which is just reminding us that irrespective of the increase in productivity, there's a clear peak. There's an optimum level of fertilizer application from an economic perspective. And therefore, the blue line reminds us that there's just actually a small window for the farmer to manage in terms of get the level of income, but at a reasonable risk. And so we're trying to integrate that into all of our advisory tools. So our systems are very much feeding into these levels of and these types of applications. And what we're very interested to see is people in other areas picking up the resource for different applications, maybe governments to design liming programs to deal with acid soils, or global programs in climate change, trying to look at carbon sequestration, or government programs working on preventing soil degradation. And of course, there's also the issue of some soil nutrients are so limiting that is having impact on the food nutrient status. So that's rolling into problems for human and animal health. So as I've been saying throughout, we're really trying to create a community, an open data community here, by putting everything out freely available and try to encourage others to share data, and we will then provide regular updates as we get significantly new batches of data. So finally, just to plug that we're running a workshop on Wednesday and Thursday during the conference, and we'll demonstrate the resource, and then we'll have a panel of individuals who have used the resource and give their perspective from the private sector, from R&D, and from other sectors. And then at the end of the workshop, we'll have a significant period for the audience to participate with the ISDA team. So that's all I've got time for today. We really hope that you'll join us at the workshop, and we can really give you a better insight into the resource, and we can also start a discussion on how we could integrate with your data and how we could collaborate in the future. So thank you very much for listening, and we look forward to hearing from you.